everybody? Ty here. Hope everyone is doing well. Now, with this video, and I mentioned it in the February Outlook, definitely should check that out if you haven't watched. The link will be in the top right hand corner, by the way. But in any case, though, I did say that February had the potential to be a very dynamic month here. Even though this 30-day average is showing predominantly above average temperatures for a lot of the lower 48, it didn't. I always say that in those outlooks, we're looking at 30-day average. Not every day is going to be like that. And this month is a very good example of that. In fact, I do think that that outlook could very well end up being turned on its head depending on how this performs. Because just like with winter weather and severe weather events, we can have overperformance or underperformance. And one thing that we're making note of right now as we look at the 6 to 10 and the 8 to 14 day outlooks is another big cold snap is on the way. How far south this pushes is still questionable at this point. But the one thing that we can make note of here is the fact that there is pretty good confidence at this point. I did see this a little bit towards the end of last month, but wanted to make sure that we had a pretty solid signal at this point, and there's pretty good reason to believe that. There is good news to this, however. When we look at the 3 to 4 week outlook, it still looks like for the most part we're going to bounce back from this rather quickly. But over the course of the next couple of weeks, though, we can expect some pretty major changes and also some pretty active weather to go along with the big temperature drop that we're anticipating to go along with it. So with that chance of below average temperatures pushing off to the south and east and increased weather activity over here, it does look like the potential for some winter weather does exist. Mainly, I would say this will stay confined over towards the Northeast and the Midwest, but still would be watching over towards the Mid-Ohio and Tennessee valleys. A little further up to the deep south, I would say it's more of a question mark right now. Wouldn't rule out the potential because we were kind of thinking that we would be all right in January, and it turns out we weren't. It wasn't the most surprising thing, especially considering the time. That's usually the time of year where we would get this kind of weather, and really this month historically is known for that as well. But as of right now, though, I wouldn't be too concerned. There are some trends that I'm keeping an eye out for, though, for you guys as well. So make sure you guys are staying tuned. Now, in the short term, main point of interest is of course going to be over towards the northwest, and then eventually we're going to start to see our attention shift a little bit more towards the northeast and the Midwest over the next few days here. What we're looking at right now on this map is the probability of snowfall accumulation greater than 4 inches here. Obviously out towards the northwest, especially up towards those mountains, probabilities are just about at 100%. And that's really to be expected at this point. Do have a little bit of activity over here towards the interior northeast, especially over towards the far northern ranges over here towards New York, Vermont, and New Hampshire as well. Adirondacks are over here as well, or Adirondacks. I've always had problems pronouncing that. Anyway, though, a lot of activity expected over here over the course of the next few days. Eventually that tapers off, and then eventually we're watching that next big system right here. We do have to keep an eye over here towards this region a little bit further off to the south here in particular. There is talk of the potential for an ice event here. However, the models are kind of showing two different tails here, if you will. Some of these regions we may start out as snow, shift into ice, and then maybe switch all the way over to rain at the very end. And then others are kind of leaning into snow, then transitioning into freezing rain at this point. Probabilities and confidence right now in frozen precipitation, not necessarily the highest, especially as we get towards the 1/10 of an inch range where the effect starts to really become palpable at this point. Confidence isn't super duper high yet, but one thing to make note of here as we get towards Wednesday evening, we do start to get into that 40 to 50 percentile range. I do think that those probabilities are likely to go up, so we'll have to be watchful of this area. But depending on how things end is going to be the determining factor as to just how significant the overall effect is. So that being said, we're going to of course get into the model data here. Now, obviously, before we do that too, we also have the suspicion of potential severe weather in the long range as well, especially as we get towards days 5 through 8 in particular. Predictability too low tags have popped up on the screen here, but I do think there's going to be a few limiting factors with that that'll keep the threat rather mitigated as of right now. Now, as we go further along here, looking, of course, at the GFS, now you'll look and see the euro on the bottom left corner of your screen. You'll see that, for the most part, as we move the GFS here, you'll see that we still have a good bit of ridging over here, but look at this storm system that pops up over here as we get towards Thursday evening. It's going to bring a fair amount of snow towards the Great Lakes. As we go further along here, this particular number, I'm going to try to circle it for you if I can. This number right here, 540, pops up. That's our 32-degree line. And what we're going to be looking for at that point is these areas a little further off towards the south, depending on how that cold air mixes with that little shallow warm layer towards the bottom of the atmosphere, will determine what type of precipitation we end up getting. Notice also the timing is going to be kind of first thing in the morning as we get into Friday here. So a couple extra complications to go along with this. So as we go throughout the day, I think the snow, like I said before, I'm thinking the snow is most likely going to shift into freezing rain. And then depending on how that middle layer, or the dendritic zone, or dendritic zone, excuse me, behaves here, it will determine whether or not we shift all the way over into rain or stick with freezing rain. Again, that's going to really be the determining factor in regards to our impacts here. So as we go further along, we'll see another storm system kind of roll in after this point here. This will be right around that Valentine's Day time frame, so you definitely need to be watchful there. And then as we go further along, we start to see a pretty notable trough come in as well as we get towards the early part of Valentine's Day itself. And after that point, it's where things really start to get busy here. And you can see the same thing on the GFS and the Euro at this point here. So it's pretty interesting to see both of these models in relatively good agreement, minus a few minute changes here, at least at this level of the atmosphere. It's really when we get towards the precipitation is where things kind of get interesting. Like I said, it's that middle level of the atmosphere. But at this range, it's kind of hard to really get into the details here still. But we'll probably touch up on that more tomorrow. Now, as we go into the temperature map here, and also we're going to look at the temperature anomaly in the bottom left corner here from the GFS to go with it. What you'll notice is I have a pretty good warm sector starting out. As we go further along here, watch how that cold air begins to come into play, especially as we get towards the 9th and beyond here. Look at how those below zero temperatures are starting to shift into the Rockies here. Eventually we see a little bit of a, I would almost go as far as to say, a jailbreak over towards these regions here. And then we have a secondary push that comes in afterwards as we get towards the 18th and heading closer towards the 19th as well. Also have a warm sector expected to build back up here too. So like I said, it's these looks right here that make me kind of leery of severe weather potential, especially as we get towards the mid to late part of the month as well. Again, a lot of other environmental factors come into play, but there are some things that I'm keeping an eye on as well. Through that whole time though, you could see how the temperature anomaly map was adjusting along with the temperature map itself. At times we've been seeing about 45 degrees below average in some places, and also some areas being as high as maybe 20 to even 30 degrees above average. So like I said, definitely has the look of a very dynamic month, and as we all know, February is a very short month to go along with it. Now, as we keep this rolling forward here, we're going to actually go back on this temperature map so we can sync it up with our dew point map. And if you look towards the bottom left corner here, in conjunction with that warm sector, you can see that moisture kind of building. It's the key factor for severe weather as well. So, like I said, a lot that we're going to be keeping track of over here over the course of the next few weeks. Definitely, like I said, definitely has that look of a very dynamic weather pattern here. For the most part, it's still predominantly a negative PNA setup, as we mentioned before in the February outlook. But as a whole here, though, and this is why we still have such a strong signal for above average temperatures towards the deep south, is whenever we deal with these little cold snaps, we're expected to recover from them very quickly. Another concern with that, however, will be also your immunity, your health. With the rapidly changing temperatures, just make sure you're doing what you're supposed to do to keep yourself healthy here. You can get sick from this kind of stuff very easily. That being said, let's shift our attention back to GFS and the Euro for the precipitation outlooks here. And this is where things really start to get interesting here. Now, if we start out with the GFS and the Euro to go along with it, you can see that for the most part activity kind of pops up out towards the west. Now, this is where things start to get a bit more complicated, is towards the 6th. So this is about 3 days out from now. We're getting to the 72 plus hour time frame here. Now, depending on how this pans out, and both of these models have different outcomes here. The Euro, by the time we get towards that 72-hour time frame and 75-hour time frame, has a much bigger ice shield in comparison to the GFS here. We have a little bit more in the way of mixed precipitation with GFS. Now, as we go further along here, notice that moisture on the backside kind of deforms a little bit. So there could be an area of interest in regards to potentially higher freezing rain and snowfall totals. Whereas with this area here in the Euro, notice that a lot of this kind of turns over into rain a bit more. So again, I'm pretty sure a lot of people would be voting for that would be rooting for that Euro outcome versus the GFS, because obviously snow, not the worst thing in the world. Freezing rain is kind of bad, especially for the roadways. So as we move that further along here, you can see that we have our next system out towards the west. This is going to work its way off to the east, as we all know. Have another potential rerun as we get towards the 9th here. Euro showing the same thing at this point in time as well. But this time it looks like in both cases we may not have that freezing rain to bail up the not freezing rain. I'm getting words slurred up. We may not get that rain on the backside to potentially bail us out. Hopefully we end up getting a little bit of a change there to where we get less of that, but my confidence in the fact that we're going to have potentially at least one, if not two, notable freezing rain events is pretty high, because these models are looking almost identical at this point here. So there is a little bit of concern that exists there. As we go much further along here, this is where things start to get a bit more interesting for the south here. We have a couple of storm systems that pop up over here. Thing is, though, there might be an instance of cold air damming here in accordance with the Euro, whereas the GFS just isn't really picking up on that. So a lot of questions to be had there. Timing is also different as well. Plus the cold air seems like it pushes a little bit further to the south on the Euro. So like I said, a lot of complicating stuff as we get towards that 8 to 10 day time frame in particular. Northeast again looks like it's going to be slammed in either case, though, regardless of which time frame we're looking at. Pretty big snowstorm seems like it pops up here, maybe even a nor'easter based off the Euro's outcome, whereas the GFS is kind of leaning against it in the short term, but takes a little bit longer to form, but eventually it does show itself here. So definitely need to be on the lookout for that as we go further along here. Now, as we move into that 282-hour mark, this is right around Valentine's Day, or the evening or night, overnight Valentine's, I would say. You can see a pretty big system kind of pop up over here. Depending on how this warm sector pops up here, maybe severe weather comes into play for this. Both of these low pressures are not the strongest that I've seen, but notable. But depending on how those lows strengthen as well could determine a lot in regards to that. Then a big cold push follows here, and we'll have to be watchful of anything that could occur over towards this region. So far right now, neither of the models are showing anything towards the deep south here, but over towards the Appalachians and areas for the northward up towards the mid-Atlantic, we could have yet another winter event on our hands there as well. So as we continue to move these forward here, last thing that we're going to see, of course, is a lot of activity again out towards the mountain west. This is towards the 19th. And of course, we only have 24 hours of difference between the GFS and the Euro. Now, this is an interesting scenario that I'm seeing kind of pop up over here as well. Depending on how this pans out, this could be that deep south event that I'm on the lookout for. So far, I haven't seen any real look or any sort of signal that would lead me to believe that we're going to get something like that just yet, but definitely something I'm being watchful of. Now, in the short range, though, at least over the next week, what I'm paying attention to most is a lot of this area out towards the northwest, where we're expecting a lot in the way of wintry precipitation up towards the far Adirondack Mountains. I would say over here towards the lakes, I would say lake effect snow, mountain snow is going to be a big deal here. Northwest, do we really even have to say it? We've been saying it for a while. With this new weather pattern that we have here, mountain snow is going to be a big deal there. And some of these areas could even be in for as much as potentially 5 to even maybe even 7, 8+ feet of snow. So be watchful out there, but if you are going to be going skiing, it's a great time. Just be careful, obviously. And then over here towards the Midwest here in the northern states, pretty significant snow expected over the next week. Not really much of a surprise. It's really this look that kind of arouses my interest the most here, and I'm a little concerned about this, is the fact that we're seeing that 1/4 inch mark of ice here. And the thing about the 1/4 inch number is that's where we start to have real issues with the roadways here. Power outages become possible here. There have been a couple events that we did live coverage on recently where we got that 1/4 inch ice threshold and beyond here, where things became really problematic. I think there was one state, I'm trying to remember exactly which one. It might have been over towards the Carolinas, where we had about up to 50,000 plus without power at one point. Hopefully we don't see that up here. This area is a little bit more familiar with winter weather, so I like their chances a bit better, but nonetheless here, we do need to be watchful. So that being said, that's pretty much all I got for you guys on this video. If you enjoyed it, you know what to do. Smash that like button, hit that subscribe button, also get that notification bell so that way you don't miss another video. And I will see you guys in the next one. Till tomorrow.